regulating or creating an appropriate adaptive immune response to biotoxins. And most commonly, the problematic biotoxins are going to be found in water damaged buildings. So buildings, right, that have all this sort of issues with water leaks or poor ventilation, all these kinds of things. And as you can see here, there's a long list of biotoxins that can be produced on any given indoor structure. So it's like a soup, a toxic soup. You might have heard this before. So it's not just molds or fungi. It's a combination of molds and bacteria interacting with, toxins and chemicals that can merge or interface with one another with these sort of organisms that sort of become a problem for these patients. And in particular, more recently, we've been paying a lot of attention to these guys, the actinobacteria and endotoxins, who seem to be very problematic for people like us in terms of triggering this hyperactive innate immune response and poor adaptive immune recognition. Okay, so essentially what happens because of this poor antigen presentation situation is that the adaptive immune system sort of over time starts to fade away. And what we have is excessive innate immune activity, right? So we're getting a lot of chronic inflammation. And over time, what happens is you're essentially putting the brain on fire, the central nervous system included in that. And it becomes dysregulated. So there's nothing keeping the innate immune system in check. And as we're doing this, there's two things that happen that I want to emphasize that are really important. So right, we're sort of burning on fire our brain. And as we're doing this, we're damaging a very important brain region called the hypothalamus that's connected to another brain region called the pituitary gland. And we start losing two very important hormones that you always have to keep in mind in your head. So we start losing functioning of something called MSH, or melanocyte stimulating hormone, and a neuropeptide called vasoactive intestinal peptide. And these guys are super important for regulating not only the immune response, so they make sure that that symbiotic relationship is sort of kept in check, but also they regulate virtually every other metabolic process in the body. So when you start losing these guys, you're running into trouble. So the innate immune system is just running free, essentially. And so going back to the concept of a healthy cell, what's happening over time is, right, you're getting all this excessive inflammation, and now cells go from being sort of a healthy, fluid, elastic cell into sort of a threatened state cell. So now the cells start becoming more rigid in their structure. And we start seeing things like glucose deficiency. So the cell stops converting glucose into energy. That's a huge problem for us in order to function. And then it also starts producing abnormal phospholipids. So the cellular membrane that is so important for keeping communication between cells is now being compromised. And then we start seeing accumulation of toxins in the cells, almost as if the cells are deliberately doing this for us. So when we think about toxicity and detox, this is actually a really important thing to keep in mind, because it is a downstream effect of what cells are doing as they're getting bombarded with this innate immune activity. And so the cells stop talking to one another in this process. I just saw the comment with the GIF. Thank you. Okay, so what happens over time is cells basically mitochondria specifically make a decision of, this is too much fire in the brain. I can't handle this. We're like literally self-destructing the whole system. So the brain now goes into a stage of, or what I would call an ice age, which is literally like we start losing neurons. The brain starts drying out in an attempt to sort of turn down all of that fire because of all the sort of collateral damage that's happening. And this is where we start seeing the more later stage aspects of CIRS, where we start dealing with issues related to metabolic problems like hypometabolism. So the glucose problem becomes very prominent here once you start entering into the stage, and you start seeing other issues that actually sort of start touching here on. But just to sort of wrap up the idea. So what is CIRS? The definition here that I want to sort of propose is that this is a mitochondrial disorder triggered by an abnormal innate immune response to these biotoxins, right? These threats that the immune system, the adaptive immune system doesn't see, doesn't know how to target and eliminate properly. And we have a genetic basis for this faulty response for the immune system. And with that said, I kind of want to have you think a little bit about this idea of toxicity. We tend to think of mold illness as a mold toxicity issue. And fundamentally, what I just described is not a toxicity issue. It is part of the process. We do get very toxic, but what's happening, it's not that, what's triggering this at its core is not that we're accumulating heavy metals, although that's happening, and we're accumulating chemicals and all of these things. But that's more of a consequence of all this metabolic dysregulation that's taking place. And we end up with a multi-system dysregulation. So everything from hormonal dysregulation, digestive, cardiovascular, pulmonary, neurological, I already alluded to that, and immune. So you start having eventually autoimmunity and allergic reactions to everything that you shouldn't be reacting. And then chronic infections start creeping over because your adaptive immune system is not working properly. So I hope this makes sense in terms of sort of providing a definition for CIRS more properly.